This ugly girl's name, Jae Kim, had always been teased for her looks. Ever since she was young, her neighbors would call her as ugly as a ghost. At age 7, during a family gathering, her relatives openly mocked her appearance. Her own grandfather even made cruel comments, suggesting she wasn't a true part of the family. But Jae Kim's mother reassured her, saying that what truly mattered was her hard work in school, not beauty. That same day, Jae Kim saw a beautiful fairy named Balala on TV and instantly dreamed of being just as pretty. She dressed up like a fairy, but her classmates only laughed harder. Their words stung and her heart ached. Years went by, and 10 years later, Jae Kim still looked the same with her thick black eyebrows and long ponytail. She struggled to fit in with other girls, who nicknamed her Dumpling. One day, her classmates shouted, "Dumpling," but Jae Kim didn't respond, so they threw a crumpled paper at her to get her attention. Startled, she looked up as a popular girl in the class ordered her to fetch breakfast. As Jae Kim left to buy it, someone called out, "Ugly girl!" But she ignored it, only asking her classmates if they wanted vegetable or meat buns. After getting the food, Jae Kim glanced toward the cafeteria, hoping to catch sight of someone handsome. Right then, her secret crush, the handsome and confident guy she admired, walked over. Without warning, he took off her headphones, leaving her both stunned and overjoyed. She could barely contain her admiration, blurting out how good-looking he was. This didn't go unnoticed. The class beauty saw the whole scene and smirked. Later, at lunchtime, Jae Kim saw him again, and his charming looks made her heart race. Her classmates saw her gaze and, in a mocking tone, joked that they'd pay one of the boys a huge sum to date her. But he immediately refused. Despite all this, Jae Kim finally decided she couldn't hold back her feelings any longer. She gathered all her courage and arranged to meet him the next day, hoping to confess her feelings. To her surprise, he happily agreed. The class beauty, witnessing this exchange, wasn't pleased. After lunch, she went straight to Jae Kim's crush and whispered that someone as handsome as him deserved better than Jae Kim. He quickly replied that he only agreed out of pity. With a wicked smile, the class beauty then told him that she wanted to go on a date with him, which made him visibly happy. She walked away, pleased that her plan had worked. One evening, Juk Kyung came home with a plan. She rushed into the kitchen, determined to make a special lunch to confess her love to Hunbin the next day. After hours of work, her love bento box was finally ready. Exhausted yet happy, she lay in bed, excited for tomorrow. The next morning, Hunbin took the bus to school, and when it came to a sudden stop, Juk Kyung lost her balance and accidentally landed on a classmate's lap. Shocked, the classmate shoved her aside with a disgusted look. 10 minutes later, Juk Kyung arrived in class, ready to sit down when her pretty friend approached. Without waiting, Juk Kyung eagerly offered to get dumplings for her. But as soon as she left, her so-called friends opened her love bento box and ruined it. At noon, Juk Kyung finally gathered the courage to confess her feelings to Hunbin, whom she'd admired for so long. But Hunbin was insulted, and his harsh words hit her hard. He even knocked her carefully prepared lunchbox to the ground, shattering her hopes. A group of classmates gathered, laughing and recording her reaction. Forced to face the cameras, Juk Kyung struggled to keep her composure, but the classmates only continued to mock her, even shoving her to the ground. Hurt, Juk Kyung asked why they treated her this way when she'd done nothing wrong. Her friend leaned in and sneered, saying she was treated this way because she was ugly. After school, Juk Kyung saw a video of her failed confession circulating online. The cruel comments called her ugly and shameless, leaving her wondering how she could face school again. Feeling heartbroken, she questioned if being ugly was a reason to be bullied. The harsh words from her friends replayed in her mind, and she began to feel completely isolated. That evening, Juk Kyung took the elevator to the rooftop, wearing her broken glasses. She looked out, gathering her thoughts. A billboard across the way showed a male celebrity, and she stepped back, thinking she couldn't go on like this. Just then, someone rushed up, grabbed her, and pulled her back to safety. Her glasses fell, and with her poor eyesight, she couldn't make out the face of the boy who saved her. When she tried to explain, he cut her off, scolding her for being reckless. Left with no choice, they headed back down the stairs together. Without her glasses, Juk Kyung stumbled, feeling her way down slowly. But the stairway seemed endless, and she slipped. Just as she was about to give up, the boy returned to help her. Despite her embarrassment, he even carried her down all 30 floors. In her blurry vision, she thought he was an old man. Finally, they reached the ground floor, where they learned the elevator was only under short maintenance. The boy, whose name was Suho, had saved her, reminded of a classmate he'd lost in the past. On the way home, Juk-kyung thought about the last message she'd left for her mother. Worried, she quickly tried calling her, but no one answered. Meanwhile, her home was filled with tension. Her father was in deep debt. When Juk-kyung arrived, she found her mother crying and assumed it was over her message. She rushed to comfort her, but her mother pulled everyone close and said they'd face their troubles together. Juk-kyung tried to apologize, saying she never meant to scare her mother. She explained that her pain came from feeling ugly, that her siblings took after her father while she looked like her mother, which she believed made her ugly. Her mother, overwhelmed, scolded her and told her to stop bringing up such thoughts. The family, despite all they were going through, needed each other to keep going. Juk-kyung had been begging her mother for permission to get plastic surgery, hoping it would finally transform her appearance. Around this time, her friend Enzan sent her a makeup tutorial video. Intrigued, Juk-kyung opened it and watched closely, comparing the before and after pictures in the video. She was shocked at the amazing difference makeup could make. Inspired, she decided to try it herself. The very next day, she applied layer after layer of makeup, determined to look her best. By the time she was finished, even her own family barely recognized her. Feeling confident, she headed to school, prepared to wow everyone. As she walked into her classroom, heads turned, and even the popular beauty girl, who had always belittled her, looked stunned, but then, to her horror, the reaction took a humiliating turn. Her classmates burst out laughing, some even pulling out their phones to record the scene. Juk-kyung quickly realized her makeup experiment had failed, and once again, she became the subject of ridicule. That night, Juk-kyung overheard her mother on the phone, calling people to borrow money. When her mother ended the call and walked back to her room, Juk-kyung called out to her. The sight of Juk-kyung's heavily made-up face startled her mother so much she almost screamed, thinking Juk-kyung was trying to scare her. Juk-kyung insisted it was just makeup, but her mother shook her head, saying she looked more like a ghost. She told Juk-kyung to wash her face, and only then did Juk-kyung realize how embarrassing her makeup had looked. Still feeling humiliated, Juk-kyung begged her mother to transfer her to a new school. Her mother nodded, saying they'd have to move anyway, as Juk-kyung's father had debts and needed to sell their house. Hearing this, Juk-kyung felt a rush of relief. She was thrilled to have a fresh start. Her mother misinterpreted her happiness, assuming Juk-kyung was blissfully unaware of the family's financial troubles. Just then, Juk-kyung's younger brother arrived home and was equally startled by her appearance. Back in her room, Juk-kyung took a long look in the mirror, sighing as she reviewed photos of perfectly done makeup online, wondering where she had gone wrong. She needed better supplies. With determination, she took a knife, broke open her piggy bank, gathered all her savings, and headed to the mall to buy cosmetics. That night, she practiced meticulously, trimming her eyebrows, applying layers of makeup, even reshaping her brows after accidentally shaving them off. The next morning, Juk-kyung was ready to attend her new school. Determined to make an excellent first impression, she put on her best makeup look and covered it with a face mask. As her father drove her to school, she happened to spot a familiar face, Suho, walking nearby. Just as her father rolled down the car window, her mask flew off, and to her horror, landed on Suho's face. Embarrassed, she ducked into the car as Suho angrily brushed the mask away. Finally, they moved into their new home, and Juk-kyung put the finishing touches on her makeup for her first day at the new school. She stepped out of the house, and her family's jaws dropped. They were speechless at her transformation. When she arrived at school, classmates stopped to stare at her beauty, some even exclaiming that they had never seen anyone so stunning. As she entered the building, she felt both proud and a little shy under everyone's gaze. Her classmates couldn't believe the change, and one even spit out his milk in shock. In the office, Juk-kyung met with the teacher, who was impressed by her sweet and pretty appearance. The principal even assumed she must be an excellent student because of her polished look, but when he checked her grades, he was speechless. She was at the bottom in every subject. The teacher, momentarily confused, turned his attention to Juk-kyung's younger brother and tried to comfort her, saying that grades weren't everything in life. Just then, Suho entered the office, and Juk-kyung was taken aback. Mumbling how handsome he looked, Suho handed in his report, and though Juk-kyung felt his voice sounded familiar, she didn't realize he was the one who had unknowingly saved her days before. As Suho prepared to leave, the teacher asked him to escort Juk-kyung to her classroom. Walking down the hallway, they were interrupted when a girl confessed her feelings to Suho. He stopped abruptly and in that moment, Juk Kong accidentally smeared makeup on his shirt. Embarrassed, she tried to blow it off, but Suho brushed her off and continued walking, leaving her flustered. When Suho arrived at his class, a friend noticed the makeup smudges on his shirt. Irritated, he took it off and realized Juk Kong was responsible. Furious, he went to find her. Outside, Juk Kong was touching up her makeup when Suho angrily tossed his shirt at her, catching her completely off guard. Moments later, the teacher led her into the classroom to introduce herself. At exactly 12:32, the classroom buzzed with excitement. A new classmate, Juk Kung, had just arrived, and she was stunning. Almost everyone was thrilled to see her, whispering to each other about her beauty and style. But while others were captivated, Suho seemed unmoved, staring out the window as if nothing had changed. The teacher assigned Juk Kung a seat, and as soon as class ended, her new classmates rushed over. They all wanted to get to know her, asking her questions and admiring her look. One girl even asked what brand of lip gloss she used. As Juk Kung reached into her bag to show it, the lip gloss slipped and fell to the ground. Just as she bent to pick it up, she looked up to see a classmate standing in front of her, and the sight made her stop. This was Sujin, who her friend quickly introduced as the goddess of the school. But now, she whispered with a hint of awe, Juk Kung herself might just be the new goddess. During the break, Juk Kung took a shirt of Suho's to the bathroom to wash a stain out of it. But no matter how much she scrubbed, it just wouldn't come clean. Suddenly, she remembered her makeup was waterproof. Perhaps that was the culprit. She stepped out, but to her shock, she accidentally splashed water straight onto Suho's face. Horrified, she apologized and offered to take the shirt to a laundromat, but Suho only shrugged and told her to throw it away. Just then, a classmate approached Juk Kung and asked if she wanted to join them to buy steamed buns. Surprised, she agreed eagerly, realizing that she was no longer the Juk Kung who used to be bullied. She wasn't alone anymore. Laughing, the three of them went to the cafeteria, enjoying the meal in each other's company. They even headed to the arcade afterward, playing games and sharing laughs. A joy Juk Kung had never experienced before, always used to being alone. Later that evening, Juk Kung decided to unwind and headed to a small bookstore to find a horror novel to read. She reached for a book on a high shelf, standing on her tiptoes, when someone suddenly snatched it from her grasp. Annoyed, she looked up to see none other than Suho. Barefaced and without her usual makeup, Suho didn't recognize her, which left her slightly unnerved. When she tried to back away, the shop owner caught her, insisting she finish a bowl of noodles before leaving. Awkwardly, Juk Kung took a huge bite, hoping to leave quickly, but to her surprise, Suho sat right next to her. She nervously shifted to the side, hoping he wouldn't recognize her. Only then did she notice his striking features, his slender fingers, his clear, handsome face. After a short chat, she confirmed that he still hadn't recognized her as his classmate. Finishing her noodles in a hurry, Juk Kung bolted out of the bookstore, only to lose a shoe in a rush. She quickly went back to grab it, then sprinted home. There, her younger brother teased her, joking that her goddess act would be uncovered soon enough. Juk Kung, embarrassed, snapped back at him, though part of her wondered if he was right. Meanwhile, Suho sat confused, wondering why the girl who had once helped him now acted like a stranger. The next morning, Juk Kung prepared for school with extra care. She carefully layered her makeup, applying foundation, eyeshadow, and lip gloss until she felt perfect. Looking in the mirror, she smiled, feeling confident that her beauty was now her shield, a way to keep herself protected. When she stepped outside, even the neighbors noticed. Her mother's friend exclaimed, "When did you get such a beautiful daughter?" Juk Kung's heart swelled with pride, and she knew her efforts had paid off. At school, she was relieved when Suho ignored her and went straight to class, confirming that he still didn't recognize her. After school, she decided to buy some new cosmetics. On her way back, she spotted a girl who had bullied her before, someone who had made her old life miserable because of her appearance. Juk Kung quickly turned, hoping to avoid her. The girl noticed, but didn't recognize her at all. Relieved but with tears in her eyes, Juk Kung hurried away, realizing how much her looks had shielded her. Just as she was hurrying down the street, she heard a loud roar of a motorbike. A group of people was chasing someone on foot. Startled, Juk Kung accidentally tripped and fell to the ground. She quickly stood up and glanced at the driver, who looked equally alarmed. The chasers finally caught up, and in a panic, the person threw their helmet toward Juk Kung before dashing off again. Juk Kung, holding the helmet in shock, watched as the scene unfolded. Soon after, the person, who she now realized was Seo Jun, was cornered in an alley. Just as his pursuers were about to strike, police sirens blared, scattering the attackers. They hadn't known Ju Kung was the one who had turned on the sirens, saving Seo Jun. As Seo Jun caught his breath, he looked around and spotted her. Ju Kim didn't hear anything as she walked into the comic shop. Just like that, she ended up getting a free helmet without even realizing what had happened. Later that night, Ju Kim decided to return some books. Worried about running into her classmates, she went in disguise, trying to stay unnoticed. When she got there, the comic book seller reassured her that the shop was empty, which made her feel safe enough to walk in with confidence. She picked out the book she needed, ready to leave, but just then, she bumped into Suho again. Her mind instantly went blank, and she didn't know what to say or do. Suho asked why she hadn't come down sooner, and Ju Kim quickly lied, saying she was just looking for a book. Suho teased her, asking how long she planned to pretend not to recognize him, clearly hinting that he knew she was aware of him. Flustered by his comment, Ju Kim lost her balance and fell off the bench. They both froze, looking at each other awkwardly for several long moments. The silence only broke when the shop owner walked in, which sent them both into a small panic. Suho quickly nudged her forward, helping her up. That's when Ju Kim nervously asked if he recognized her from before. Suho nodded, saying yes, but what he meant was he recognized her as the girl who'd jumped off the rooftop. Meanwhile, Ju Kim thought he'd seen her true, unmade-up face, which she hid at school with makeup. The conversation between them grew more confusing as they each talked about different things without realizing it. Ju Kim, worried about her secret, hoped Suho wouldn't tell anyone. Suho, thinking about her rooftop jump, promised to keep quiet, but Ju Kim wanted something more solid. So, she quickly drafted a confidentiality agreement and asked him to sign it. Amused, Suho refused. The two then began talking about a book. One, Ju Kim happened to be holding. To get it from her, Suho finally agreed to sign the agreement and even treated her to a bowl of instant noodles. In a lighthearted moment, Ju Kim accidentally got noodles on her nose. Suho noticed, laughing and covering his face with his hand as he playfully criticized her messy eating. The next day, Ju Kim, feeling bad for dirtying Suho's shirt, washed it and prepared to return it, along with a novel she'd borrowed, but she hadn't realized that returning this book might reveal her secret identity. Suho, unaware that she was the same girl from the rooftop, couldn't recognize her due to her makeup. At school, Ju Kim carefully planned to give him the book, but just as she was about to, Sujin walked up and told Suho that the teacher needed to see him. As Suho left, Jung asked a nearby classmate about Sujin and Suho's relationship. She learned that their families seemed close. At lunchtime, Ju Kim overheard her classmates saying that she looked like a goddess and was beautiful, even while eating. Embarrassed, she put down the big piece of meat she was about to bite into, carefully cutting it into small pieces to eat more elegantly. After lunch, she went to find Suho, bringing his shirt, the book, and his headphones. She asked him to follow her to the rooftop. Suho, misunderstanding her intentions, thought Ju Kim might have a crush on him, so he followed her eagerly. Before he could say anything, Ju Kim told him she'd washed his uniform. Suho took the bag and then asked if she liked him, catching her off guard. She stammered, explaining they'd only met a few days ago, but Suho, still mistaken, assumed she liked him and confidently walked away. Only then did Ju Kim realize Suho still hadn't recognized her bare face, which she had been so worried about. She suddenly remembered the thank you note she'd written in the book that morning, thanking him for keeping her bare face a secret. Panicking, she chased after Suho, finally catching up with him. She reached for the bag, saying she'd given him the wrong thing. Suho, intrigued, didn't hand it back. Thinking quickly, Ju Kim blurted out that there were personal items, sanitary napkins, in the bag. Startled, Suho stiffened, allowing her to grab the bag and dash off to the bathroom. As she walked away, her mind raced. Did Suho have his own secret? Had they crossed paths before without her realizing? She felt more confused than ever. On the bus home, something unexpected happened. As Ju Kim dozed off, a man sitting next to her started to act suspiciously, taking out his phone to snap a picture. Luckily, Sujin, a classmate, noticed and immediately stepped in, slapping the phone out of the man's hand. While Sujin was busy explaining herself, the man seized the opportunity to push her aside and flee the bus, leaving everyone shaken, but grateful for Sujin's quick actions. Sujin didn't think twice. When she saw the man jump off the bus, she immediately sprang up and chased after him. As she bolted down the street, her classmates on the bus watched in stunned silence, wide-eyed at the sight of Sujin going all out to catch the guy. He was fast, and it seemed like Sujin might not be able to keep up, but Sujin had a plan. She grabbed her backpack, swung it around with a powerful spin, and launched it straight at him. The move hit its mark, knocking him down, and Sujin was able to subdue him until the police arrived. Once they took over, she finally let him go and climbed back onto the bus to a round of applause. Her classmate, Ju-kung, became her #1 fan right then and there. When they arrived at school, Ju-kung was walking around the campus with her friends, enjoying the day. Suddenly, a motorbike zoomed toward them, coming to a quick stop right in front of them. As the rider removed his helmet, Ju-kung's memories flooded back. She thought, "No way, could it really be him?" Her friend nearby leaned in and mentioned that the guy's name was Han Sojun. Sojun, along with another student, Suho, were known as the handsome gods of the school. Whenever Suho appeared, girls couldn't help but gather around him, feeling their hearts flutter with just one look. And Sojun was no different. Wherever he went, he was surrounded by fans admiring his every move. Even something as simple as washing his hair seemed to make people swoon. But Ju-kung felt a nervous twinge seeing Sojun, and to her surprise, he was in her class too. He had taken a few days off for something, and today the teacher asked him to sit next to Suho. However, Sojun refused. The two of them were sworn rivals, and instead, he walked over to Ju-kung, telling her to move and sit next to Suho since he usually sat there. The teacher quickly explained that Ju-kung sat in that spot because she needed to, as her eyesight wasn't great. Feeling embarrassed, Ju-kung apologized, but Sojun didn't respond and seemed to brush it off. Meanwhile, Suho looked at Ju-kung, feeling that her face seemed oddly familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. Later, after school, a group of rowdy students appeared, seemingly looking to pick a fight with Sojun. But as the so-called school boss, Sojun wasn't intimidated. Instead, he arranged a meeting with them in a nearby alley. Just as things were heating up, Sojun stormed in, scolding the group angrily. It turned out they were actually his juniors, just staging this whole scene to welcome him back to school. Back in class, a teacher announced a new group project and paired up the students. Sujin and Sojun were placed in one group, while Ju-kung and Suho were partnered together. Sujin jokingly asked Sojun if he was up for the task. Sojun smirked confidently, mistaking the question for a modeling gig, and bragged that he'd once been a model. The whole class fell silent, puzzled, while Ju-kung quietly felt uneasy. She wished she could avoid Suho's attention entirely, but ended up seated right across from him. She kept her head down the entire time, trying not to be noticed. Later that night, as Ju-kung lay in bed, trying to shake off the day's embarrassment, her phone rang. She answered, surprised to hear Suho on the line. Ju-kung, startled, asked him how he had her number. Suho replied vaguely, saying he'd heard it from someone. Then he mentioned she had something he needed. Ju-kung glanced at a paper bag on her table, realizing what he meant. The two arranged to meet at a park cafe, but Ju-kung felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. She worried about which version of herself Suho would be expecting, the one with makeup or the bare-faced one. If he saw her as the acne-prone girl from the comic store, he might feel tricked and get angry. Desperate for a way to hide her bare face, Ju-kung came up with a plan. She would wear a helmet. Later that night, she arrived at the cafe with the helmet securely on her head. When Suho asked why she was wearing it, Ju-kung quickly replied that it was for safety, in case she fell off her bike. She didn't want to risk injuring her face. Suho shrugged, not asking further, and told her to get what he'd come for. Ju-kung, still unsure whether he wanted books or her uniform, stalled by saying she couldn't find it. Luckily, Suho clarified that he needed the comic book, and she hurriedly handed it over. After receiving it, Suho turned to leave, but not before suggesting she have some hot water before going home. Ju-kung was relieved, but she stayed seated, knowing her helmet would protect her identity. Suho, noticing her helmet, asked if she planned to drink while wearing it. Ju-kung insisted it was fine. She'd use a straw, and pretended that she wasn't feeling hot inside it. Oblivious to the stares of others around her, she sat there, feeling safe in her disguise. But she realized if she stayed too long, her cover might blow. So she made an excuse to go to the bathroom. In the restroom, Ju-kung accidentally startled her sister, who was washing her hands, by taking off the helmet. After cleaning up, she headed back to her seat and asked Suho how he really got her number. He revealed he got it from the comic book seller, which made her realize he was genuinely interested in connecting with her. Desperate to keep her identity hidden, Ju-kung tried to distract him by drinking more water and talking as little as possible, hoping he wouldn't catch on. After some time, Ju-kung rode her bike home, exhausted from the day. When she got back, she went straight to bed, her thoughts filled with Suho. She decided right then that she would stay away from him tomorrow, hoping a little distance might help her feel more at ease. The next day, Juk-kung brought Suho's clean uniform to class and quietly returned it to him, avoiding eye contact. Without saying a single word, she turned and hurried off, feeling a wave of despair wash over her. But as she made her quick exit, she accidentally stepped on Sojun's foot. Just as he was about to head back to class, he recognized her as the one who had borrowed his helmet during their exercise class and wasn't pleased about it. Later that day, everyone was busy playing soccer on the field when a ball went flying. Juk-kung saw it and tried to pick it up, but once again found herself stepping on Sojun's foot. Annoyed, Sojun called her out for taking his helmet. Juk-kung froze, not knowing how to respond, so she nervously pointed in another direction. Unimpressed, Sojun told her not to mess with him. Just as he said this, a balloon suddenly came out of nowhere and smacked right into his head. Juk-kung laughed a bit, saying she would return the helmet tomorrow, but as she turned to walk away, she tripped over her own feet, stumbling to the ground. Sohyun looked on with a quiet smirk, while Juk felt her cheeks burning from embarrassment. As she picked herself up, she saw Suho passing by, oblivious to her clumsy moment. Juk sighed, her heart sinking as she watched him walk away. Her thoughts distracted her as she reminded herself that avoiding him was probably for the best. Soon, everyone was back in the classroom. Today happened to be Sua's birthday, and her boyfriend had arranged a sweet surprise with flowers scattered across the floor. When Sua entered and saw the scene, her face lit up with joy, and she happily embraced her boyfriend. Just as they leaned in for a kiss, though, a classmate holding a cake lost his balance and sent the cake flying right into Juk-kung's face. Her classmates giggled, and someone suggested she should wash her face, but Juk-kung panicked. She knew that if she washed off the cake, everyone would see her bare face, which she had carefully concealed with makeup. Not wanting anyone to touch her, Juk quickly grabbed her bag and dashed out, her only goal to reach the bathroom in time. In her hurry, she accidentally knocked into Sojun, who was left baffled by her speed. Juk burst into the bathroom only to realize it was already occupied. Without thinking, she rushed to the next door, only to find herself in the men's bathroom. By now, a small group of friends had followed her. Curious about the cake incident, Juk managed to lock herself in a stall, breathing a sigh of relief. When she finally emerged and returned to class, her face was freshly washed. Her classmates noticed her acne and immediately began teasing her, saying things that hurt her deeply. She tried to hold back tears as a mixture of embarrassment and anger welled up inside. It turned out this humiliating scene had only been her imagination, but she knew she had to be extra careful now. At that moment, a figure appeared beside her. It was Suho, who gently placed his jacket over Juk's head, shielding her from everyone's gaze. She felt a strange sense of relief and gratitude as she looked into his eyes. Without a word, they left the room together and went to the teacher's bathroom, where she quickly reapplied her makeup. When she finally rejoined her classmates, she felt grateful for Suho's kindness, though she wondered if he had seen her bare face and chosen to protect her secret. After school, Juk found her younger brother and told him everything that had happened. He agreed with her suspicions, suggesting that Suho might have indeed discovered her secret. Why else would he go out of his way to shield her? But his comment made Juk nervous. What if Suho intended to use her secret against her as a way to torment her? Back in class, her mind kept drifting to Suho, and she imagined him plotting revenge. Her paranoia began to make her hallucinate, and as she walked down the hallway, she imagined Suho with sharp fangs, like a vampire hungry for revenge. These visions haunted her, leaving her anxious and unable to focus. After school, Juk thought she was free from these worries until her phone rang. It was Suho, who told her to meet him at a nearby comic book store. Before she could respond, he hung up. Juk felt a chill. She knew he was calling her out to confront her. Summoning her courage, she went to the store, still without makeup. When she arrived, Suho handed her a small gift, a package of tissues. He thanked her for lending him a comic book and mentioned that someone at Sabum High School looked strikingly like her. Juk tried to brush it off, claiming her face was ordinary and insisting she'd never heard of that school. But inside, she was terrified. Suho didn't let it go, playfully teasing her about her acting skills. He asked directly if she was Juk-kung, his classmate. Juk, desperate to deny it, came up with an excuse, saying that the person he was talking about was her cousin, but Suho didn't buy it. At that moment, Jan's mother stormed into the bookstore, her voice echoing through the aisles as she scolded Jan. Right then, Juk Kyung realized her cover was blown. Suho now knew her secret. She sighed and admitted it openly, asking Suho what difference it made if he knew. But just as her confession left her lips, the lights suddenly went out, and Juk Kyung seized the opportunity to make her escape. When she got home, A sense of despair washed over her. She felt as if everything in her life was falling apart, and she couldn't help but wallow in the unfairness of it all. What she didn't realize was that Suho had actually figured out her identity long before. The day she returned his shirt, he'd seen the comic book in her bag and made the connection. As she sat there sulking, she glanced at her sister, who was playing a game with fierce determination, the kind of determination that said she would never give up, no matter what. This sparked something in Ju-kyung. She felt a sudden rush of inspiration. The next day, she decided to face her troubles head-on. She experimented with a bold, new makeup style to bolster her confidence, though her mother immediately noticed and ordered her to remove it. Ignoring her mother's scolding, Ju-kyung brushed it off. She had a battle to win. Upon arriving at school, Ju-kyung made her way straight to Suho. She couldn't let him hold this over her. Her bare face revealed was her most vulnerable side, and she couldn't stand the thought of him knowing. Her resolve grew stronger with each step, filling her with a determined, almost fierce energy. She transformed, summoning her inner Gunara Nanan, ready to confront him like a warrior stepping into battle. Finally, Ju-kyung found Suho and warned him that if he dared tell anyone about her wearing makeup, there would be serious consequences. She glared at him, feeling as if every ounce of her strength was focused on this one moment. But Suho calmly pulled out a bracelet and held it up, surprising her completely. She saw it and instantly knelt before him, pleading with him to keep her secret safe. Suho, amused, asked why he should do her such a favor. In desperation, Ju-kyung promised she would do anything in return. And, unexpectedly, Suho agreed. In that moment, Ju-kyung felt like Suho was her guardian angel, her secret keeper. Back in the classroom, Suho, annoyed by the bright sunlight, quietly mentioned it to Ju-kyung. She quickly got up to close the curtains, eager to do whatever she could to stay in his good graces. During class, Suho texted her saying he was thirsty, and without hesitation, she claimed she had a stomach ache to slip out. Her classmates snickered as she dashed out of the room, but she returned moments later with a bottle of water, reluctantly forcing a sweet smile as she handed it to him. Not long after, Ju-kyung had a run-in with Sojun. He had caught her carrying a stack of homework and took the chance to corner her, demanding to know why she hadn't returned his helmet. Realizing she'd completely forgotten, she promised to bring it to him the next day, but Sojun, unsatisfied, warned her that he wouldn't let it go if she didn't. After delivering Suho's homework to the office, Ju-kyung hurried back to class and proudly told Suho the mission was complete. He chuckled at her serious expression, amused by her dedication. Later that day, when she finally got home, she frantically searched for the helmet, only to find out her younger brother had sold it. Furious, she chased after him, giving him a playful yet stern beating until their mother intervened. Just as the evening settled in, Ju-kyung received a message from Suho asking her to grab a comic book from the store and bring it to the amusement park in 10 minutes. Knowing time was tight, she hurried to her younger brother, gave him a quick kiss to make peace, and slipped past her mother's objections. Rushing out the door, at the comic book store, she found out the book had just been checked out by a boy. Desperate, she asked him to let her borrow it, but he refused, forcing her to buy ice cream as a bribe. Just as she thought she'd succeeded, another text from Suho reminded her that time was up. In a last-ditch effort, Ju-kyung risked annoying the boy, who promptly decided he wouldn't lend her the book at all unless she danced for him. Determined, she broke into a silly zombie dance, much to the boy's amusement and Suho's, who happened to witness the whole scene. Finally, she managed to retrieve the book, handing it to Suho with an embarrassed farewell. The next day, Ju-kyung sought out Sojun to settle the helmet issue. She slipped a note into his pocket, urging him to read it later. His friends teased him, thinking it was a love letter, only for Sojun to find that it was a blunt confession that the helmet was lost. He was enraged but kept his cool, hiding the note and telling everyone it was just like the other love letters he'd received. When Ju-kyung returned to her classroom, Suho motioned her over, signaling that her nightmare might be starting all over again. Later that afternoon, he called her up to the rooftop, where, in an unexpected twist, he asked her to join the school's talent competition. With determination, Ju-kyung began practicing each day, preparing to rise to the occasion. And soon, the big moment arrived. It was finally time for her to step into character and face yet another challenge head-on. Ju-kyung had accidentally gulped down too much water, which meant one thing: she urgently needed to find a bathroom. After taking care of business, she stopped by the mirror to give herself a little pep talk. She was about to step into an audition and needed all the confidence she could muster. However, when she arrived at the audition room, she noticed the crowd that had been gathered outside had vanished. Assuming they had already gone inside, she nervously opened the door. Without a second thought, Ju-kyung set her microphone and cell phone down and launched into her dance routine, giving it everything she had. Her movements were bold and passionate, unaware of the confusion setting in among the teachers watching her. Meanwhile, Soo-ho, who had just arrived, also opened the door and took in the scene. Ju-kyung was so caught up in her performance that she didn't notice anything else around her. But when the lights brightened, she realized with a jolt she had entered the wrong room. The entire audience was staring at her, frozen in surprise. Embarrassed, she quickly dashed out of the room. Soo-ho, who had been watching from the doorway, couldn't help but smile at the scene. Later, when she got home from school, her mother scolded her, saying that if she had time to put on makeup, she should be using it to learn something new. Just then, her younger brother came into the room with a new helmet he had just bought. But Ju-kyung hardly noticed. A moment later, her phone buzzed with a text from Soo-ho. He asked her to bring him a comic book, and without replying, Ju-kyung hurriedly headed to the store to find it. As soon as she stepped outside, it began to rain heavily, but she continued dashing through the downpour. Unfortunately, her rush brought her face to face with a group of thugs near a barbecue restaurant. They sneered at her, saying her appearance was so bad it was scaring people. Ju-kyung tried apologizing, but the bullies weren't satisfied, and people around her just laughed instead of stepping in. Limping from a wound she'd gotten, she eventually found Soo-ho, who immediately noticed her injury. Concerned, he asked why she hadn't used an umbrella. Misunderstanding him, Ju-kyung thought he was telling her to buy one, and frustration bubbled up. She burst out, asking him if he really had nothing better to do than to make her run errands. Her feelings came pouring out as she cried, asking why everyone seemed to hate her for something as simple as her appearance. Seeing her so upset, Soo-ho took off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, and told her to wait while he ran out in the rain to get medicine for her leg. On his way back, another student, So-jun, spotted him, growing more irritated at the scene. When Soo-ho returned, Ju-kyung was nowhere to be seen. Frantically, he called her name, finally spotting her nearby. He rushed over and gently tended to her wound, not realizing that his actions had caught So-jun's attention and sparked his jealousy. The next day, So-jun couldn't take seeing Soo-ho and Ju-kyung together any longer. As he ate lunch, he spotted them interacting, which only fueled his frustration. Without a word, So-jun walked up to Soo-ho, threw his food tray to the ground, and sat down beside Ju-kyung. She thought he might be there for the helmet, but So-jun only said he wanted to eat with her. This bold move pushed Soo-ho's patience past its limit, and he grabbed So-jun, furious. The two exchanged heated looks before So-jun finally threw a punch. Soo-ho tried to fight back, but the teacher arrived just in time to break up the altercation. Rumors about the fight spread like wildfire through the school, with classmates whispering that the two gods of the school had fought over Ju-kyung. Embarrassed by all the attention, she tried to avoid the questions, but her friends decided to set her up with someone to help change the subject. Coincidentally, Soo-ho overheard this plan and, feeling uneasy, decided to check in on her. He managed to sit in the back row of the cinema where she was supposed to meet her date. Watching her, he grew increasingly restless until he could take it no longer. As her date leaned close, Soo-ho swiftly stepped in, separating them. He found himself unexpectedly close to her date, which left both of them in an awkward position, and Ju-kyung noticed the commotion, turning around just in time to see Soo-ho backing away. When the movie ended, her date walked her out, and to her surprise, brushed his hand through her hair before leaving. Just as he disappeared, Soo-ho darted behind a billboard to avoid being seen by Ju-kyung. That evening, her phone buzzed with a message from her date, confessing that he already had a girlfriend and apologizing for leading her on. Heartbroken, she realized that the romance she thought she'd found had ended before it had really begun. Little did she know, Soo-ho had followed the man and had demanded that he send the text to clear things up. The next day, on her way to school, Ju-kyung saw So-jun pass by on his motorbike. Startled, she accidentally smeared lipstick across her nose. Amused, So-jun stopped to ask if she and Soo-ho were dating. Flustered, Ju-kyung quickly shook her head, feeling a bit confused at his curiosity. But So-jun seemed satisfied with her answer, only adding more to her bewilderment about these two boys who seemed to keep her in their sights. As the class began, the teacher called Soo-ho, Soo-jin, and Ju-kyung to answer a question at the podium. So-jun raised his hand confidently, looking at Soo-jin, then at Soo-ho, and finally at Ju-kyung. Shaking his head, he thought, no way. There's no chance Ju-kyung knows the answer. Every time she took a test, she scored only 1 point. She was completely clueless and probably hoping Suho would help her. But Suho just glanced at her and ignored her silent plea. Sujin and Suho completed their answers and returned to their seats, leaving Jukung alone, frozen and unable to write a single word. The teacher approached her, explaining that the questions were different for each student, so glancing at other people's papers would be useless. Sojun couldn't contain his laughter, and seeing him chuckling so openly, the teacher called on him to answer the question next. Jukung felt relieved, happily heading back to her seat, but just like Jukung, Sojun was one of the weakest students in the class, and he couldn't answer the question either. After school, Jukung went to her mother's shop to help out. To her surprise, Sojun and his mother walked into the store as well. Jukung's face went pale. She was not wearing any makeup, and the thought of Sojun seeing her like this was horrifying. Jukung's mother noticed Sojun and complimented him, remarking on how handsome he was. She even suggested introducing her daughter to him. Jukung was so startled by her mother's words that she jumped onto the bed, which, due to her weight, collapsed under her. She ended up lying in front of everyone in what she tried to make her most elegant pose. Sojun, watching all this unfold, couldn't help but find it hilarious. He looked closer and realized it was Jukung. As it turned out, their mothers had been close friends for years. Seizing the moment, Sojun took out his phone and snapped pictures of Jukung, taking photo after photo until he'd amassed 99 snapshots of her. Jukung, utterly embarrassed, begged her mother to let her go home, but her mother simply joked that her face would scare people at night if she didn't wash it off. Meanwhile, Sojun kept holding onto those pictures, clearly enjoying his newfound leverage. Sojun's mother casually asked if Jukung and Sojun were classmates, assuming they must be good friends. Jukung could barely respond, while Sojun's mother mused that everything would be just fine between them. She even invited Sojun to dinner at their house, making Jukung quickly blurt out that she had cram school the next day, but Sojun exposed her by pointing out that she actually had a gathering planned. Jukung's mother scolded her, while Sojun's mother praised Jukung for being so responsible, unlike her son, who was always riding his motorbike around. But Jukung couldn't resist. She piped up that Sojun actually rode it every single day and drove so fast he nearly hit her. Furious, Sojun wanted her to stop, but she ignored him and kept talking. She said he drove so recklessly that he nearly ran her over. The next day, Jukung got her revenge. She saw Sojun with his motorbike and snapped a quick photo, but Sojun wasn't going to let her win that easily. He showed her the photo he'd taken of her the previous night. With a smirk, he told her to delete the photo of his bike, or he'd reveal her embarrassing pictures to the entire class. Just then, Suho walked by and saw them bickering, shaking his head at their antics. Later, Suho found Jukung and told her that if she had nothing productive to do, she should stop causing trouble and focus on her studies instead. At recess, Jukung saw Sojun with a group, seemingly looking at something on his phone. She panicked, thinking he might be showing everyone her photo. In a bold move, she spotted his motorbike key, grabbed it without a word, and bolted out of the school. Sojun quickly chased after her, finally catching up. In that moment, Suho also appeared, and suddenly, each boy held one of Jukung's arms, each pulling her in a different direction. Jukung glared at both of them, then shook free from their grip, unwilling to get stuck in the middle of another one of their arguments. She tossed Sojun's keys back to him and told Suho to leave her alone too. With a quick push to clear her way, Jukung hurried off, leaving both boys behind. After the exams, the group decided to celebrate by going to karaoke. Everyone was having a blast, singing and dancing, except for Suho, who sat off to the side, looking lost in thought. But then, he noticed Jukung's legs showing under her skirt, and flustered, quickly grabbed a pillow to cover them. Jukung didn't notice, as she had already headed to the bathroom. As she returned, she was drawn to a familiar voice singing in the next room. Peeking through the window, she noticed Sojun's motorbike parked outside. With a mischievous grin, she went out and kicked the bike, only to be caught in the act by Sojun himself. Sojun asked her what she thought she was doing. Jukung denied everything, claiming she hadn't touched his bike, but Sojun wasn't convinced. Suddenly, Suho appeared nearby, and Jukung, not wanting the two boys to fight again, quickly dragged Sojun away. Just as they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of thugs, the same ones who had picked on Sojun before. Sojun urged Jukung to leave him and run, but Jukung, refusing to abandon him, grabbed his hand and pulled him along as they sprinted away. Unknown to them, Suho saw them fleeing together, running as fast as they could, side by side. After an intense chase, Jukung and Sejun managed to escape from the gangsters. But Suho wasn't as lucky. He found himself face to face with the gangsters who had pursued them. To make things worse, The gang soon discovered that Suho was also a student at Sebum High School, just like Sejun. As Suho turned to leave, one of the gangsters stopped him, thinking he was sent by Sejun. Tempers flared, and a fight quickly broke out. Suho, skilled in Taekwondo, wasn't intimidated and fought bravely. However, he couldn't hold his own against an entire group. They managed to overpower him, landing a punch before the patrol police suddenly arrived, putting an end to the confrontation just in time. Meanwhile, Jukung was preparing to ride Sejun's motorbike back home. Not long after, Sejun invited her to a comic book store. Unexpectedly, Suho was there too, and when Jukung saw the two together, a strange feeling crept over her. She couldn't shake the thought that they might have been connected in a past life, maybe even as husband and wife. In an experimental class the following day, Suho surprised Jukung by pulling her to sit beside him. He offered her a bottle of mango juice, and then, to her surprise, handed her a bottle of strawberry juice as well. She didn't quite understand what Suho was up to, but she accepted it with a smile. She couldn't help but glance at him now and then, noticing his handsome features. Her smile came naturally whenever she looked at him, almost unconsciously. Later, during lunch, Sejun sat down next to Jukung, but she immediately told him to sit elsewhere. Sejun, however, playfully insisted that he would do anything to make her happy, except for moving away. Then, with a mischievous grin, he took a bite of her favorite fried pork, which made her fume. But before she could react, he clapped his hands, and 2 big plates of fried meat were brought over just for her. The other students began taking pictures, amused by the scene. Jukung returned Sejun's keys, thinking that was the end of it, but he revealed he had already parked his car in front of her house, catching her by surprise. As she walked to the restroom later, Jukung unknowingly dragged a long piece of toilet paper behind her. Sejun saw it, stepped on it, and even teased her by calling her a long-tailed monkey. Embarrassed, she quickly rolled up the paper. Just then, another classmate accidentally bumped into her, drawing laughter from the crowd, and even Suho caught sight of the whole scene. Mortified, Jukung blamed Sejun for her mishap, pushed him aside, and ran off in embarrassment. That evening, Suho called Jukung, inviting her to meet him at the basketball court. Jukung felt a flutter of happiness. When she saw herself in the mirror before heading out, she took extra care with her appearance, even applying some makeup. They spent the evening together, playing with a stray cat, shooting hoops, and strolling down the street. As they walked, a deeper connection began to grow between them. The next day, at school, Jukung noticed some students bullying a friend who reminded her of herself. The sight of it stirred up memories of her own past experiences with bullying. By the afternoon, the bullies were still tormenting the girl, so Jukung poured a basin of water over them, hoping to put an end to their cruelty. The bullied girl took the chance to run out, with Jukung following her. The bullies began to taunt Jukung, but Sujin, another student, stepped in, warning them to watch their words. The following day, Jukung went to find Go Won, a friend who was about to perform on stage. Looking at Go Won's makeup, Jukung noticed she looked much like herself in her earlier years, so she decided to help Go Won with a makeover. When Go Won stepped onto the stage, she looked stunning, earning admiration from the audience, who praised her new look. It was clear that Go Won had gained a newfound confidence, even leaving Jukung's younger brother speechless. After the performance, Go Won hurried over to thank Jukung just as Sejun appeared with a bouquet of flowers. It was then that Jukung learned Go Won and Sejun were siblings. Jukung was often regarded as the most beautiful girl in town, but her grades were far from impressive. Each time she received a test score, it was embarrassingly low. When her mother saw her latest report card, she was so frustrated that she had to grab a fan to cool herself down. In her exasperation, however, she accidentally fanned the homeroom teacher's face instead, prompting him to cover his face with his hand, trying to hide his eyebrows beneath his hair. The story took a surprising turn when the teacher noticed something unusual. Juk Young was born without eyebrows. Concerned, the homeroom teacher called Juk Young's mother, hoping to find out if she'd noticed this. In response, Juk Young's mother handed her a business card. It turned out she was an eyebrow tattoo artist. What an unexpected coincidence. As she left the school, Juk Young's mother spotted someone who made her heart race. It was Suho's father, a famous celebrity. With his striking looks, he quickly attracted a crowd of middle-aged women who couldn't help but admire him. Juk Young's mother was no exception. She was smitten by Suho's father's charm and even joked, "Can I buy you with money?" This playful remark shocked everyone around her until they realized she was only asking for his autograph. Juk Young, watching her mother act this way, felt so embarrassed that she fled. Later, Suho approached his father, wondering why he'd come to the school. It became clear that Suho and his father didn't have the best relationship. As they spoke, Juk-young's mother rushed over, excited to see that Suho and Juk-young were classmates. She couldn't contain her happiness, but Suho shyly walked away. In the afternoon, during an experimental class, Juk-young and Suho sat nearby but refused to speak to each other. They had argued recently. As Juk-young was about to leave, someone tugged her shirt, thinking it was Suho. She put on an annoyed face and told him to let go, only to realize her shirt was caught on something. Embarrassed, she quickly made her exit. When Juk-young arrived home, she was startled to find Suho sitting in her living room. She looked at her mother in shock, who simply asked why she was so surprised. Juk-young didn't say a word and instead ran upstairs, flustered. Her mother explained that she'd met Suho at a comic book store and, charmed by his presence as the son of her favorite celebrity, had invited him over for dinner. During the meal, Juk-young's mother insisted on feeding Suho herself, which made everyone laugh. Her younger brother even admired Suho's shirt and asked if he could borrow it for a few days. Suho, always kind, said, "If you like it, you can have it," which made Juk-young's brother thrilled. Juk-young, embarrassed, kicked her brother under the table, but he grabbed her leg back, causing a playful struggle. In the commotion, she accidentally fell into Suho's arms. Just then, her slightly tipsy older sister returned home, accidentally knocking out the power and plunging the house into darkness. Amid the confusion, everyone scrambled around, bumping into each other, while Juk-young's sister sat calmly, still eating. The next day was Sunday, and Juk-young's sister decided to take her to a sauna. After her time was up, Juk-young prepared to leave, only to run into Sojun. Horrified, she quickly turned her face away. She hadn't put on any makeup and didn't want him to see her like that. Trying to play it cool, Juk-young stayed quiet, though her heart raced as Sojun and another man made a bet on who could stay in the heat longer. An hour passed, and Sojun was drenched in sweat. His friend joked about how Sojun's girlfriend would think he looked tough, and he complimented Juk-young's beauty, which prompted Sojun to protest, calling her plain. Already feeling overheated, Juk-young was even more annoyed by his words, but she held her composure. The other guy, noticing she hadn't moved in a while, wondered if she had fainted. He was about to get up to check on her when Juk-young, pretending to be perfectly fine, assured them that she was comfortable and asked them not to worry. Impressed, the man left, calling her a true sauna expert. Once they had gone, Juk-young finally crawled out, completely exhausted. After leaving the sauna with her sister, they stopped by a convenience store to pick up some food. Just as Juk-young turned to leave, she froze. She'd just run into the last person she wanted to see, a girl from her old class who used to bully her, always taunting her as the ugly duckling. Yu-kung felt utterly humiliated and couldn't bear the laughter around her. She rushed away in embarrassment, her steps quick and unsteady. But after a short distance, she suddenly realized something important. She'd dropped her wallet. Just then, Suho appeared, having picked up the lost wallet from the girl who'd found it. Without hesitation, he chased after Yu-kung to return it. Yu-kung, however, was suspicious. She thought Suho was mocking her, just like everyone else, ridiculing her for not being as pretty as the others. But Suho didn't say a word. Instead, he gently placed a hat on her head. A quiet but kind gesture. He assured her softly that everything would be okay. This simple act of kindness made Yu-kung see him in a new light, her heart softening a little as she looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. The next day, Sojun was in high spirits. He was busy with his skincare routine, happily moving around his room. Wearing bold leopard print shorts, he began to dance around, throwing in his best moves and swaying with a confidence that bordered on hilarious. Suddenly he froze. He realized there were others in the house watching. Sojun's face turned red with embarrassment, but he tried to act cool. His sister asked him if he could ever act normal at home, and Sojun, feeling a bit awkward, lowered his gaze and greeted Yu-kung, pretending to be calm. Once he thought he was finally alone, he jumped onto his bed, screaming in embarrassment over what had just happened. Yu-kung had caught a glimpse of his dance and, trying to spare his feelings, assured him she hadn't seen anything. But this only made Sojun feel more embarrassed. After she left, he ran after her, catching up to grab her by the hair in a mock fit of frustration. They were the perfect picture of playful enemies. Yu-kung, seeing his flustered face, teasingly mentioned that she'd seen his leopard print underwear. She even glanced down at his pants, causing Sojun's cheeks to flush with anger and embarrassment. The following day, at school, Yu-kung couldn't resist the urge to tease Sojun again. She jumped in front of him, smiling mischievously as she watched his reaction. But Sojun, instead of feeling annoyed, found himself captivated by her. Watching her walk away, he felt an unfamiliar warmth. He realized he might actually be falling for her. Meanwhile, a gang of thugs had stumbled upon a picture of Sojun with Yukung. Mistakenly believing she was his girlfriend, they decided to use her to get revenge on Sojun. The thugs cornered Yukung and made a call to Sojun, claiming they had his girlfriend. They demanded he come quickly, leaving Sojun and Suho, who happened to be with him, shocked and deeply concerned. Suho's worry for Jukung was clear. In a brave moment, Jukung used her phone to make a video call to her classmates, hoping someone would realize her situation. Her friends quickly understood something was wrong when they saw the menacing figures in the background. Sujin, her best friend, immediately recognized the location and took action. Suho and Sojun hurriedly searched room after room until, at last, Suho found Jukung. Without a word, he charged forward to fight off the gangsters. Even though he was outnumbered, Suho's strength and determination made him unstoppable. Shortly after, Sojun arrived, tossing his bag aside and joining the battle. When he saw the gang leader closing in on Yukung, he became furious, feeling protective of her. Sojun's anger fueled his punches, and soon Sujin joined the fray, kicking down one of the thugs with fierce loyalty to her friend. Together, Suho, Sojun, Sujin, and Jukung fought back. Their teamwork and martial arts skills overpowered the gang, leaving the thugs scrambling and defeated. Their victory, however, didn't go unnoticed. The next day, the owner of the karaoke bar, where the fight had happened, reported them to the school, and they were all disciplined. After school, Suho tracked down the male student who'd bullied Jukung before and used his popularity to intimidate him into apologizing to her. The student, feeling trapped, had no choice but to relent. That night, he went to Jukung to apologize in person. Startled, she assumed he was there to pick a fight, and without thinking, she sprayed pepper spray in his face. He stumbled backward, insisting he'd only come to apologize, and after quickly delivering his apology, he ran off, leaving Jukung confused but slightly amused. The next day brought a surprise for everyone. Sojun somehow managed to score 50 points on an exam. His classmates were shocked, and even Sojun was taken aback by his success. Feeling smug, he asked Jukung how she had done. When she revealed she'd scored just 49 points, Sojun couldn't help but laugh and poke fun at her, delighted to have finally outscored her. At this time, Sujin was furious. She had so much pressure to be the best in her exams. If she didn't score first place, she knew her father would severely punish her, which filled her with dread. Meanwhile, Jukyung had come home in tears because her own exam scores weren't as good as she'd hoped, and her mother, angry and disappointed, threw away all of her cosmetics. Heartbroken, Jukyung cried, feeling the weight of her mother's harsh actions. Just then, Suho arrived at Jukyung's house. He noticed the door was left ajar, so he let himself in. As he stepped inside, he saw Jukyung coming out, crying. Startled, Suho quickly hid to avoid being seen. Once she was outside, Jukyung went straight to the trash area, searching through the garbage to retrieve her discarded cosmetics. Suho, seeing her sadness, quietly approached and suggested they go out to eat noodles together. As they ate, Jukyung's sadness slowly faded, and the simple noodles felt as luxurious as abalone, all because of Suho's comforting presence. She felt grateful and lighter with him around. After their meal, Suho walked her back home. On the way, Jukyung accidentally stepped on an earthworm, and she froze in terror. Seeing her distress, Suho knelt down, offering to remove her shoe so she wouldn't have to step on it again. He encouraged her to sit down so she could steady herself, but Jukyung misunderstood and awkwardly sat on his shoulder. Embarrassed, Suho gently clarified and guided her to sit nearby instead. Red-faced, Jukyung hurriedly took her recovered cosmetics and made her way home, but Suho stopped her one last time to hand her a small, beautiful hairpin. The next day, Jukyung wore the hairpin proudly to her extra classes. Suho was nearby and waiting, but his attention was drawn to Sujin, who looked unusually upset. Concerned, he asked her what was wrong and learned that her father had scolded her for not taking first place on the exam. At that moment, Jukyung arrived and caught sight of Sujin leaning on Suho's shoulder, crying. The scene stirred mixed feelings in Jukyung's heart. She recalled Suho mentioning that he had someone he liked and began to assume that it must be Sujin. During class, Suho invited Jukyung to sit beside him, but she hesitated, signaling instead that she would sit elsewhere. She didn't want to be close to him, not when she was feeling so confused. After class, Jukyung left quickly, eager to get home and sort through her tangled emotions. Once home, she thought back to the moment she saw Sujin in Suho's arms. The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. But then, in a sudden burst of frustration, she grabbed a doll, imagined it was Suho, and stomped on it to release her anger. Her younger brother happened to walk in at that moment, and seeing her unusual behavior, he backed away, frightened and confused. The following day, Sojun approached Ju-kyung, asking for her help in choosing a gift for his younger sister. Just as they were browsing, she got a call from Suho. But before she could speak, Suho overheard Sojun's voice in the background and sensed she was with another guy. Ju-kyung, thinking Suho had feelings for Sujin, quickly ended the call, trying to avoid any further misunderstandings. Yet, Suho couldn't shake the jealousy building inside him. He pictured Ju-kyung with someone else, and his heart ached. Later that day, as Ju-kyung and Sojun headed toward the elevator, Suho appeared, determined to see Ju-kyung. Without a second thought, he stepped in and firmly pulled her away from Sojun. Not one to give up, Sojun grabbed Ju-kyung's other arm, leading to an intense tug-of-war over her. Neither one was willing to let go. Suddenly, the elevator door began to close on them, and Suho anxiously pushed the button to keep it open, not wanting Ju-kyung to get hurt. Yet, in the midst of the struggle, the elevator malfunctioned, trapping all three inside. In the claustrophobic elevator, Ju-kyung's discomfort grew. She couldn't hold it in any longer and urgently needed a restroom. Seeing her distress, Sojun quickly called for help. Meanwhile, Suho noticed a cup in Sojun's hand, took it without a second thought, and offered it to Ju-kyung, which only made Sojun angrier. Ju-kyung urged Sojun to get assistance, and after what felt like an eternity, the maintenance team finally arrived and helped them out. Ju-kyung, despite her embarrassment, was relieved to be free again, leaving both guys astonished by her strength of will. The next day, the school organized a camping trip. To everyone's surprise, Ju-kyung and Sojun showed up wearing matching outfits. Sujin noticed them immediately, jealousy flickering in her eyes. During the bus ride, Suho hoped Ju-kyung would sit next to him, but before she could take a seat, Sujin slid into the spot beside Suho. With no choice, Ju-kyung found a place further back, and as if on cue, Sojun joined her. As they rode, Suho kept glancing back at Ju-kyung, unable to hide his longing. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as everyone around began cheering and shouting, urging Suho and Sojun to finally express their feelings for each other. Suho's gaze stayed fixed on Sojun, his face clouded with anger, though he couldn't do anything in the moment. Once they arrived at the campsite, the classmates quickly gathered to take a group photo. A few of them noticed that Ju-kyung and Sojun seemed to be wearing matching outfits. Immediately, they started teasing, insisting that the two of them should take a picture together, since they looked like a couple. Even their teacher noticed, scolding them for wearing couple outfits on a school trip. Embarrassed, Ju-kyung hurriedly denied it, trying to brush off the teasing. But her friends wouldn't let it go. They kept pushing, suggesting that if they weren't together, they wouldn't have matched their clothes. Suho, standing nearby, could hardly contain his irritation. Ju-kyung told Sojun to take off his shirt to stop the teasing, but Sojun just smirked and teased her back, saying they'd only just started, and she already wanted him to take his shirt off. Everyone laughed, as their playful banter turned into lighthearted bickering again. Soon after, the school organized a group game where 4 people had to team up. Sua's boyfriend slyly tried to bring Suho and Ju-kyung together, pulling Ju-kyung to Suho's side. But Sojun was already in that group, and Sua, wanting to be near her boyfriend, pulled him over instead. Suddenly, Ju-kyung found herself as the odd one out. Not missing a beat, Sojun quickly pulled her back to his team, determined not to leave her alone. The game rules required the 4 team members to stand together on a single sheet of paper. Suho's group clung together tightly, but Suho's attention never left Ju-kyung's group. He couldn't help but watch her every move, though he tried to stay focused on his own team. As the game went on, it grew more challenging. The host instructed each team to fold their paper in half, making the space even tighter. Sensing the difficulty, Sojun immediately scooped Ju-kyung up to help them balance. Suho had enough. He looked ready to charge over and pull them apart, but Sua's boyfriend held him back, laughing off his frustration. The game continued, with Sua now climbing onto her boyfriend's back for balance, and Suho finally lifting Sujin onto his. The tension was fierce, but Suho's focus was still on Ju-kyung. When the game escalated again, with only 1 foot allowed on the paper, Sojun's team struggled to hold on and finally lost their balance, leaving Suho's team as the winners. But Suho's attention was still on Ju-kyung. He noticed her laughing and dusting off Sojun, and his jealousy flared up again. Sujin saw it too, watching Suho's expression with interest. As night fell, it was finally time for dinner, but Suho's eyes kept drifting to Ju-kyung across the campfire. Later, when everyone was winding down, Suho pulled Ju-kyung aside, asking her to go on a walk with him. The two of them wandered further away from the group. The air was chilly, and a sudden gust of wind sent a shiver down Jukyung's spine. They soon found themselves by the riverbank, where an old, creaky boat was tied. Neither of them knew it, but this path was known as the Road of No Return, rumored to be haunted. Meanwhile, back at camp, the students were gathered around listening to an old man's eerie tale. He spoke of a young girl who once lived nearby, forced into an arranged marriage. Desperate, she leaped into the well to escape her fate, and legend says that anyone who lingers near that well would face her ghostly wrath. The students dismissed it, laughing off the idea of ghosts, and decided to go see the well for themselves. At the riverbank, Suho and Jukyung were sitting in the boat, talking and enjoying the quiet, when suddenly a fly buzzed close to Jukyung's face. Startled, she lost her balance and fell into the river. Suho quickly dove in, helping her back to shore, but as the water washed over her, her makeup disappeared, revealing her bare face. Jukyung panicked, fearing her classmates might see her without makeup. Just then, Sujin appeared nearby. Desperate to hide, Jukyung pushed Suho away, hoping Sujin wouldn't notice. But Sujin came closer, and Suho, quick thinking, told her it was only a wild boar making noise nearby. Accepting his explanation, Sujin walked off. At the well, the students had reached the edge, daring each other to look inside. A few of them thought they saw something move and panicked, running back toward camp in a rush, too terrified to even look back. Watching from a distance, Jukyung popped her head out, relieved they hadn't seen her. She was about to turn back when she suddenly came face to face with Sojun, who had been searching for her. In that tense moment, her phone went off, startling both of them. Jukyung, shaken, accidentally slipped from her hiding spot, and Sojun, equally startled, fainted on the spot. Jukyung scrambled to a secluded area, checking her phone to find a message from Suho asking where she was. With a sigh, she replied, telling him she'd return to the group as the night's excitement finally wound down. Suho reached into his pocket and carefully pulled out a small box. Inside was a delicate necklace, something he had chosen to give to Juk as a way of confessing his feelings. But little did he know that the next day would bring an unexpected twist. Early the following morning, Juk-kil woke up even earlier than usual, putting on her makeup with precision. She didn't want her classmates to see her without it. She worried about what they might think. Later, during school hours, the teacher gathered everyone together and announced that there were 5 hidden treasures scattered nearby. Whoever found them could keep them. Immediately, all the students began their treasure hunt. Deok Kyung, however, didn't feel well. She quietly told the teacher, and as she stepped aside, Sojun noticed her discomfort. Without hesitation, he jumped into his car to go check on her. He tried calling Juk multiple times, but she didn't respond. Finally, he reached her, gently touched her forehead, and realized she had a fever. Acting quickly, Sojun got out of the car, brought back some water and medicine, and sat next to her. After she took the medicine, Sojun took off his coat and draped it over her to keep her warm, then slipped a small bracelet onto her wrist. Meanwhile, Suho was frantically searching for Juk Kim, and his worry grew when he couldn't find her. When Suho finally located Sojun, he saw Juk Kim resting her head on Sojun's shoulder. The sight stunned Suho, especially when he noticed the bracelet on Juk Kim's wrist. He moved forward, intending to wake her up, but Sojun blocked him. Feeling provoked, Suho couldn't hold back his anger anymore. He charged at Sojun, and just like that, a fight broke out between the two, each defending their love for Juk. Their classmates, who saw the scuffle, simply thought the two were play fighting, unaware of the real emotions driving their rivalry. Although both boys ended up exhausted, neither was willing to give up on Juk. Later that night, the school hosted a party, and the students asked Sojun to sing a song. At first, he was reluctant, but Juk persuaded him by agreeing to one of his requests. With her encouragement, Sojun took to the stage, surprising everyone, especially Juk, with his impressive singing talent. She'd never seen this side of him. He had always seemed like a tough, intense guy, not someone with such a musical side. The next day, Juk returned to school in a good mood and sent Suho a photo they had taken together the day before. Suho waited eagerly, but no message came. Curious, he asked her why. When Juk checked her phone, she realized she'd accidentally sent the picture to a different classmate, the boy with glasses, a notorious gossip. If he saw it, the entire school would know in no time. Panicked, Juk ran to retrieve the phone. Luckily, he hadn't read the message yet, so she had a chance. She spotted his phone in his pocket, and with a burst of determination, she rushed forward, snatched it while he wasn't looking, and ran back to class. But there was another problem. His phone required a fingerprint to unlock. As she was figuring out her next move, the teacher entered the room, forcing her to wait. Fortunately, the boy with glasses didn't notice anything during class. 2 lessons later, he dozed off, giving Juk a chance. She quietly lifted his finger to unlock the phone and quickly found the message. Just as she was about to delete the photo, he suddenly woke up, asking her why she had his phone. Before she could respond, Sojun appeared and took the phone, his face freezing when he saw the photo of Juk and Suho. Before he could react further, Juk managed to snatch the phone back and delete the image, but Sojun still eyed Suho with a dark expression. Later, Juk and Suho arranged to meet up off campus. Juk was nervous about dating in secret, knowing how much pressure she would face if others found out. She even chose the most hidden restaurant, far from school, for their date. They ordered a couple's meal, but were given only one set of utensils. Laughing, they looked around, realizing that this was just how the couple's meal was served. Suho then began feeding Juk, and just as things grew more comfortable, a waiter hurried over, apologizing for forgetting the extra cutlery, but Juk's heart stopped when she noticed a group of classmates entering the restaurant. Without a second thought, she motioned for Suho to hide under the table. Her friends walked over, asking her whom she was dining with. Juk, feeling the pressure, insisted she was eating alone, but they pointed out that one person wouldn't order a couple's meal. Suho remained absolutely still, hiding, while the classmates pretended to leave. Just as Juk began to relax, one of them dropped down, noticing Suho under the table. The boy with glasses, respecting their privacy, cracked a few jokes, greeted Suho, and finally left. On Sunday, Juk went job hunting to earn extra money for her tuition. Sadly, her lack of experience led to rejection after rejection. Feeling defeated, she went to the restroom to gather herself, but was shocked to find a boy changing clothes there. To her astonishment, it was Sojun. When Juk asked him what he was doing in the women's restroom, Sojun, equally flustered, realized his mistake and ran out. It turned out that Sojun was working part-time at the store, posing for a photo shoot with his effortlessly charming looks. The director, noticing Juk's presence and needing a fill-in model, asked her to join as well. Enticed by the idea of earning money, Juk agreed immediately. Since Juk Kyung was new and inexperienced, Jun was hesitant to work with her. The photographer noticed the tension between them and saw that their poses weren't quite right, so he called for a break, hoping they'd relax a bit. During the break, Juk Kyung felt unusually hot, so she lifted her skirt slightly and started fanning herself vigorously. Even with that, Jun was visibly uncomfortable, but Juk Kyung wanted to help him out. She tried to wipe the sweat off his forehead, but he stopped her hand gently. Then, with a sudden movement, he pushed her down onto the sofa, and they found themselves staring into each other's eyes. Jun broke the silence, saying with a hint of a smile, "I am also a man, you know." Juk Kyung laughed and replied, "Of course you're a man. Why would you be anything else?" Just then, the photographer returned and was thrilled to witness the chemistry between them. He quickly grabbed his camera, snapping photos of the scene unfolding naturally. Now in sync, Jun leaned in close to Juk Kyung, causing her to blush shyly as they continued with the photo session. After the shoot, Juk Kyung decided to treat Jun to dinner as a thank you for helping her earn money that day. She didn't realize that Jun couldn't handle spicy food, but he didn't want to upset her, so he tried his best to eat everything she ordered. Once they finished, they both headed home. Nearby, they noticed an older man who seemed a bit eccentric. This man was catching food meant for pigeons, eating it himself, and even mimicking the birds by begging for food. A passing couple gave him strange looks, but he didn't mind, continuing to eat the food he caught. This odd scene happened to catch the attention of Suho, who was on a call with Juk Kyung. As they spoke, Juk Kyung's father appeared suddenly, looking disheveled. He was actually hiding out after trying to get money back from someone who had tricked him. Suho, realizing the situation, decided to bring Juk Kyung's father home. Her father, however, had no idea that Suho and Juk Kyung had feelings for each other. In fact, the two of them got along wonderfully, sharing a meal of turkey noodles, watching a football game together, and even hugging in excitement over the match. The next morning, Juk Kyung's father hinted that he might be home late, asking Suho to keep this a secret. Suho agreed, willing to help out. That night, he and Juk Kyung went on a date. While walking, a bus drove by, splashing water onto Juk Kyung. Quick to react, Suho wrapped his arms around her to shield her from the splash. But unbeknownst to them, Sujin, who had feelings for Suho, was nearby and saw the tender moment between the two. Her heart sank, as it was painful to see the one she liked with someone else. Since Juk Kyung's clothes were now soaked, Suho took her home to change. Just as they were getting comfortable and their food order arrived, Juk Kyung's father appeared. Earlier, while tidying up, he had come across a bottle of fine wine, intending to take only a small sip, but ended up drinking the whole bottle and passing out. Now awake and seeing Suho, He quickly hid under the table, not wanting to interrupt. As Suho and Juk-kyung sat at the table, her father, unable to resist his hunger, reached out stealthily for a slice of pizza and took a big bite. Meanwhile, Suho and Juk-kyung were engrossed in a horror movie, nervous yet excited. Her father watched, amused, thinking that Suho was a bold young man for bringing a girl home. Just as a ghostly figure appeared on the screen, scaring Suho, he unconsciously moved closer to Juk-kyung, their eyes meeting in the dim light. Seizing the moment, Suho leaned toward her, drawn in by the tension. Meanwhile, her father peeked out from his hiding spot, curious about Suho's girlfriend. To his surprise, he realized it was his own daughter, Juk-kyung. Just as the two were about to kiss, her father grabbed Suho's leg, scaring them as they mistook it for a ghostly hand. When Juk-kyung saw her father's face, she was shocked and embarrassed. Later, as Juk-kyung and her father headed home, he sternly told her she wasn't allowed to sleep over at a man's place before marriage. Juk-kyung couldn't help but feel a bit mortified by the whole ordeal. The two struck a deal. Her father would help her keep the relationship hidden from her mother, and in return, she would keep his unplanned stay at someone else's place a secret. The next day at school, Soo-jin, fearing that she might lose Suho, confessed to Juk-kyung that she had feelings for him. Juk-kyung was stunned to hear this, especially since she was already dating Suho. She decided to be honest with Soo-jin, revealing that she and Suho were together. Soo-jin's reaction was swift and hurt. She angrily splashed juice on Juk-kyung. Once close friends, the two now stood on opposite sides, both heartbroken. Suddenly, Juk-kyung stood up and shouted loudly, only to wake up and realize it was all a dream. Yet, dreams have a funny way of hinting at real emotions. Both Jun and Soho were the popular guys in school, and it was clear they both liked the same girl. That day, Juk-kyung went to Jun's house to make mandu, dumplings, with his family. Jun's mother kept complimenting Suho on his good looks and skills, while Jun's father warmly engaged with Suho as well. Jun's mother even jokingly told Juk-kyung that when the time came, she should choose a boyfriend like either Jun or Suho. Juk-kyung could only blush and smile shyly as her heart was caught between these two amazing young men. Even her little brother chimed in, saying he would vote for Suho, making the situation even more complicated. Jim's mother always loved to talk about her favorite son-in-law, making it no secret to anyone. Not to be outdone, Sojun chimed in and said his father would perform in 2 days, and he'd get a ticket for Juk-kyung's mother. Hearing this, Juk-kyung's mother was utterly taken aback. Suho's father was her idol, making this a surprisingly tough choice. She thought quickly and declared that she'd choose whoever made the better mandu, dumplings. As soon as she said it, Suho and Sojun exchanged a determined look, and although they tried to stay calm, an intense rivalry began brewing between them. Without hesitation, both boys dove into the task, rolling dough faster and faster, neither willing to lose. They poured years of single-minded practice into creating beautiful dumplings. Juk-kyung's family watched in amazement as the boys worked. Not only were the dumplings becoming delicious, but each one looked like a tiny work of art. When they finished, Suho presented a golden dragon with 9 claws, while Sojun crafted an extraordinary crane. Their parents were stunned, marveling at the skill the boys had poured into a simple dish, but just as they admired the masterpieces, Juk-kyung's father accidentally brushed against Suho's dumpling, and the delicate dragon fell apart. In the end, Juk-kyung's mother declared Sojun the winner. Sojun couldn't resist giving Suho a smug look of victory. While the mandu cooked, Suho took the opportunity to slip away and head to Juk-kyung's room. As he looked around, he noticed photos of her as a child. It made him pause, remembering his own past. Long ago, when he was sad, there had been a girl at the comic book store who always found ways to cheer him up. Looking at these photos, he realized it had been Juk-kyung, but he kept this revelation to himself, instead asking her for a photo of her younger self. Embarrassed, Juk-kyung refused, saying she thought she looked awkward back then. The two playfully argued over it until they both fell onto the bed, laughing. At that moment, Juk-kyung's father stormed in, shocked to see them so close. He scolded Juk-kyung, insisting that any relationship she had must be respectful and pure. Soon it was time to eat, and Sojun and Suho went to fetch a table. As they set it up, Sojun couldn't resist asking Suho why he and Juk-kyung seemed to fight so often. Was it love? Or was it friendship? Suho brushed him off, saying it was none of Sojun's business. Offended, Sojun shot back that if he ever saw Juk-kyung unhappy, he wouldn't hesitate to take her back. Suho, angered by this challenge, grabbed Sojun. Their scuffle quickly escalated, and they tumbled down the stairs, still fighting. Juk-kyung's family, gathered nearby, stared in shock, realizing the boys were locked in a full-blown rivalry. Eventually, they stepped in to stop the fight and decided to enforce their family's unique reconciliation ritual. Each boy had to trim the other's toenails and declare, "I love you." Both of them were utterly disgusted, but they went through with it. Once they were done, they bolted out of the house, eager to put the awkward moment behind them. The next day, Suho was waiting for the bus when he came across something that shook him. A song written by his late friend seemed to have been stolen. Across town, Sojun, who was working part-time as a model, noticed the same thing. The two had once been close friends, but misunderstandings and their friend's tragic death had driven them apart. Yet, when they realized their late friend's song had been exploited, they both rushed to the recording company, determined to find answers. Lost in their anger and distracted, they ran across the street together, only to be struck by an oncoming car. When Yukyung heard about the accident, she raced to the hospital, her heart pounding. As she arrived, she burst into tears, fearing the worst. But just then, Suho walked in through the door, alive and unharmed. Realizing she'd mistaken the patient, Jukyung felt an overwhelming wave of relief. Sojun, also standing nearby, seemed equally affected by her reaction and asked who she was to Suho. To deflect suspicion, Suho claimed she was his cousin. Yukyung tried to play along, even going so far as to wrap a cloth around her head to look less familiar. But Sojun noticed how strangely affectionate their conversation was for cousins, and Yukyung quickly excused herself the following day with both his arms in casts. Sojun found himself in an awkward position. Needing to go to the restroom, he asked Suho for help, though Suho refused at first and even suggested Sojun call the nurse. After a while, though, Suho couldn't help himself and reluctantly helped him to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Jukyung, unaware of the chaos from the previous day, took extra care with her makeup, preparing for her next encounter with the two rivals. When Yukin arrived at the hospital, she opened the door and was utterly shocked by the sight in front of her. There was Sojun and Suho lying awkwardly on top of each other. Suho immediately tried to explain, saying he was only helping Sojun change clothes. But Sojun noticed how Yukin looked at them and sensed the misunderstanding. She thought something romantic was happening. Upset, Sojun got up and stormed out. Suho, thinking Sojun was just going to the bathroom, even called out, asking if he needed help. Yukin's confusion only deepened as she observed Sojun's odd reaction. She thought that maybe Sojun really cared about Suho more than he let on. Trying to shake off her assumptions, Sojun quickly told her to stop imagining things and then left, visibly embarrassed. Wanting to lift Suho's spirits, Yukin decided to bring him some comic books from a nearby store. However, as she handed them over, the books fell, and they both bent down at the same time to pick them up. As they did, their clothes accidentally got tangled together. At that exact moment, Yukin's younger brother, who had been sent by their mom to check on Suho, entered the room. He set down the chicken soup he had brought, took one look at the awkward scene, and smirking, told them to carry on while he made his exit. With a sigh of relief, Yukin and Suho tried to untangle themselves again. But just as they thought they were in the clear, they heard the voices of Sojun's friends coming down the hall. If those friends saw them in this position, rumors would undoubtedly spread across the whole school. Thinking fast, Suho urged Yukin to hide under the bed. He had just managed to cover himself with a blanket when the friends burst in, looking around. As if on cue, Suho's classmates arrived to check in on him. They looked around suspiciously, eyes lingering on Suho's bed. They insisted on lifting the blanket, which sent a wave of fear through both Suho and Yukin, who was hiding underneath, trembling. Meanwhile, outside the room, Yukin's younger brother encountered Gowon, the girl he had a secret crush on. Seeing her caught him off guard, and in his nervousness, he tried to impress her. However, Gowon barely paid him any mind and continued on her way. Then Sejin walked by, and when Gowon spotted him, she greeted him with a friendly, "Brother." Yukin's brother froze, surprised. He had always thought Gowon and Sojun were dating. Realizing that Sejun, Gowon's brother, had been the target of his jealousy, he felt embarrassed. Trying to regain his pride, he threw a sarcastic goodbye to Sojun, who watched with a frown, growing more and more annoyed. Meanwhile, Gowon placed a silly pair of underwear over her brother's neck and left him looking foolish. Inside the hospital room, the scene was lively and chaotic, as classmates chatted, laughed, and played around. Yukin watched, feeling helpless as Sojun's friends practically took over the room. They greeted him excitedly, then suddenly burst into laughter, pulling out leopard print underwear from their pockets and proudly wearing them on their heads. One of the friends, noticing that Suho was sweating, leaned in to wipe his forehead, but Suho stopped him, saying he could do it himself. Undeterred, the friend asked if he could wipe Suho's feet instead, then noticed Suho was wearing bright pink socks, which made them all laugh. Realizing things were getting out of hand, Soyun told his friends to leave, but they insisted on staying to keep him company for the night. Yeogun, who had been hiding this whole time, was in a panic. Soyun finally managed to chase them all out of the room, following them to make sure they left. With everyone finally gone, Yukon, barely giving herself time to slip on her shoes, hurriedly ran out of the room. After they were discharged from the hospital, Sojun and Suho took a break together on a bench, resting and chatting. Just then, a cigarette butt landed near their feet, and a large, intimidating man approached them. Believing he was alone, Sojun boldly told him off. But suddenly, a group of the man's friends climbed out of a nearby car, and Sojun immediately sensed trouble. The man called Sojun over, but just as he was about to go, Suho stopped him, wanting to handle the situation himself. In a burst of courage, Sojun started to run, but then had second thoughts and circled back to help Suho. During the chaos, they accidentally stumbled into a manure pit, ending up covered in chicken waste from head to toe. The men, disgusted by the smell, decided to leave them be, hurling a few insults as they walked away. Sowun, annoyed, blamed Suho for not standing firm, but both of them couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous they looked, sitting in a nearby cart, covered in filth. Later, back at Suho's place, they cooked instant noodles together. Still feeling hungry, they decided to mix in some rice, and the simple meal turned out to be delicious. Just as they were settling down, Suho's phone rang, and he picked up immediately, realizing it was Yukon. Not wanting Sochun to overhear, Suho moved to a quiet spot. Yukon asked how his day had been, and as he recounted the day's events, she laughed, advising him to eat more fruits and vegetables to speed up his recovery. The warmth in her voice brought Suho a sense of comfort, and as they chatted, she even sent him a playful kiss through the phone. Suddenly, Dukin's younger brother burst into her room, announcing loudly for her to come out. When she asked what he wanted, he laughed and said he had something important to show her, only to reveal it was a prank. Yukon chased him in mock fury, but paused when she realized she was still wearing her cow-patterned pajamas. Embarrassed, she quickly told Suho goodnight and hung up the phone, grateful for the warmth of their conversation and the joy they had shared. Early the next morning, Ju Kyung was feeling incredibly happy. Today was a special day. She was finally going to see her boyfriend. With a big smile, she stepped out of the house, and to her delight, there stood Suho, waiting for her by the door. As soon as their eyes met, they held hands and walked together to school, enjoying each other's company. At school, things took a different turn. Soo Jin, who seemed to have her own agenda, went out of her way to approach a new transfer student, a girl who, like Ju Kyung, had attended the same school before. After Ju Kyung said goodbye to Suho, she was just about to go when Soo Jin called her back. When Ju Kyung turned around, she was stunned to see the new girl walking toward her alongside Soo Jin. The sight brought back painful memories. This girl was once Ju Kyung's best friend, but had hurt her deeply in the past. Just seeing her reminded Ju Kyung of the days when she was bullied. She remembered how this same girl used to stand beside her, only to snap a photo of her to mock her later. As they got closer, Haemin, the new girl, asked Ju Kyung for her name. Soo Jin watched with a smug smile, clearly pleased with herself. Ju Kyung didn't respond. She simply ignored Haemin and turned away, pulling Soo Jin with her. Watching the two of them leave, Haemin felt unsure. She wondered if Ju Kyung was really her old classmate, but Ju Kyung was certain. Soo Jin had set up the whole encounter, deliberately trying to bring her painful past back into her life. Later that evening, Soo Jin's scheming continued. She met with a girl known as the School Beauty, someone who was popular and influential at school. Soo Jin wasted no time, revealing to her that Ju Kyung was once the ugly duckling. The two took a taxi to Ju Kyung's house, planning to confront her and stir up trouble. However, as they arrived, they were spotted by Sojun, who happened to be passing by. Sojun immediately stepped in, pulling them aside before they could reach Ju Kyung. The School Beauty, noticing Sojun's protectiveness, assumed he must have feelings for Ju Kyung. To humiliate her further, she showed Sojun an old photo of Ju Kyung without makeup, hoping to shock him. But to her surprise, Sojun only looked at her and said that, to him, Ju Kyung was far prettier than anyone like them. Then he took her phone and smashed it on the ground, warning both of them that if they ever messed with Ju Kyung again, he wouldn't let it slide. The next day at school, Ju Kyung could feel everyone's stares on her. As she walked into the classroom, Sua, one of her classmates, approached her with a concerned look and handed her a phone. The moment Ju Kyung looked at it, her heart sank. A video of her bare face had been leaked, and now the whole school had seen it. Feeling as if her world was collapsing, she rushed out of the classroom, her heart pounding in fear and humiliation. Soo-jin, standing in the background, looked on with a smug expression, clearly pleased with her handiwork. As Juk-kyung tried to escape the prying eyes of her classmates, she was suddenly stopped by a group of female bullies who dragged her into the bathroom. There, they cruelly wiped off her makeup with tissues, taunting her about her appearance. Just when it seemed like there was no escape, Suho arrived just in time, stepping in to protect her. But the humiliation had already been too much. Overwhelmed, Juk-kyung broke free and ran off, with Suho frantically chasing after her, desperate to help. Meanwhile, Sojun, who had been trying to understand what was happening, saw an old video of Juk-kyung and realized the depth of her suffering. Even Juk-kyung's younger brother, who had overheard classmates talking about his sister, couldn't hold back his anger. He confronted them, getting into a fight, even though he was at a disadvantage. Determined to find answers, Sojun visited Juk-kyung's old school and confronted the school beauty, demanding she delete the video. She denied responsibility, hinting instead at someone else who might have leaked it. At that moment, it dawned on Sojun who the real culprit was. Back at school, he found Soo-jin and without making a scene, pulled her aside to ask why she was doing all of this. Soo-jin didn't deny anything. She coldly admitted to leaking the video, even saying there was no point in deleting it now since the entire school had already seen it. Sojun shook his head, telling her that while she thought she was ruining Juk-kyung, she was actually destroying herself. The teacher soon became aware of the situation. The homeroom teacher, visibly upset, scolded the students for finding amusement in someone else's pain. He reminded them that Juk-kyung was their classmate and that it was cruel to laugh at someone being hurt. His words made the entire class fall silent. Back at home, Juk-kyung was devastated, shutting herself in her room and refusing to eat. Her father, seeing her pain, came up with a simple but loving plan. He began grilling meat outside her door, letting the delicious aroma waft in, hoping it would bring her comfort. At school, Go-woon, a friend of So-woon, confronted the forum administrator to get the video taken down. In a surprising moment, So-yoon stepped in as well, using his persuasive charm to convince the administrator to delete it. At the same time, the homeroom teacher called Juk-kyung's mother to discuss the video, showing her what her daughter had been enduring. Seeing the footage, her mother finally understood why Juk-kyung wore makeup to school every day. That night, Juk-kyung, struggling with hurt and betrayal, decided to confront Soo-jin. Though she hadn't expected it to be Soo-jin behind the leak, she realized that Soo-jin was the only one who knew her bare face. Facing her former friend, Juk-kyung saw Soo-jin admit to everything before turning away, leaving Juk-kyung standing there, hurt and alone. Juk-han was devastated, trying to understand why her closest friend had hurt her so deeply. When Juk-kyung got home, her mother couldn't help but rush over to hug her tightly. Her sister explained that their mother had even gone to her school, and her mother questioned Juk-kyung, asking why she had endured all this pain alone without sharing it with her family. Juk-kyung admitted she was afraid her mother would worry too much, so she chose to stay silent. Determined to help her daughter feel confident, Juk-kyung's mother made a bold decision to look into plastic surgery. But when they visited the doctor, they learned that the surgery would cost hundreds of millions. Even so, Juk-kyung's mother was unwavering, saying she would spend any amount if it meant her daughter could feel beautiful and confident. The doctor explained the procedures, adding double eyelids, opening the inner corners of her eyes, filling her nose with silicone, using cartilage from her left ear to sharpen her nose tip, and even using tissue from her chin for balance. The intended result, however, looked strikingly similar to Juk-kyung's appearance when she wore makeup. Realizing this, her mother decided against the surgery and suggested they leave. Once back in the car, Juk-kyung's mother proposed transferring her to a new school where no one knew her past. This way, Juk-kyung could have a fresh start without the painful memories of classmates mocking her appearance. Later that evening, Suho came over to see her. He reassured her with heartfelt words, saying that her beauty lay within and that makeup or appearances didn't matter to him. With a gentle smile, he accompanied her home. The next day, Suho went to a comic book store, recorded a playful video on his phone, and shared his feelings for Juk-kyung through the screen. Watching the video, a warm smile spread across Juk-kyung's face. That evening, her mother prepared Juk-kyung's favorite grilled meat for dinner. Her younger brother knocked on her door, inviting her to join them. But when he opened the door, the room was empty. Snow began to fall at school the next day. As Juk-kyung arrived wearing her small leather shoes, her classmates glanced her way, surprised. They quickly noticed that she wasn't wearing any makeup this time. Instead of laughing at her, they greeted her warmly, sensing her courage and growth. Jukyung smiled, feeling a newfound strength. Her best friend Sua suddenly ran out of the classroom, and Jukyung followed her, worried. In the hallway, Jukyung noticed a group of girls who had bullied her in the past. She quickly ducked into the bathroom, hiding as her insecurities resurfaced. The girls entered, making cruel remarks about how someone like her could never be with Suho. Their harsh words swirled in her mind. Only after they left did she gather the courage to emerge, realizing she didn't have to be afraid of them anymore. She chased after them, demanding they take back their words. The bullies laughed, questioning where she had found this sudden courage. With pride, Jukyung announced that Suho was her boyfriend and that he cared about who she was, not her appearance. She warned them not to spread rumors about her or Suho again, or she would set them straight. Her classmates were awed by her boldness. Just then, Suho arrived, and in front of everyone, gently kissed Jukyung on the forehead, then hugged her, leaving the onlookers stunned. The sight of the top student openly showing affection for a girl considered ugly by others shook the whole school. Suho and Jukyung walked back to class, hand in hand, while Sua watched them with a mix of emotions. That afternoon, Sujin, who had plotted against Jukyung, approached her, accusing her of using her appearance to gain sympathy. But before she could say more, Sua intervened, angrily throwing things at Sujin and expressing her deep disappointment. She had overheard Sujin's malicious plans that day and realized her friend had been deceptive all along. Sua stormed out, hurt and betrayed. Jukyung quickly chased after her, catching up at the basketball court. She hugged Sua, apologizing for not being open with her. Sua tearfully admitted that she was hurt because Jukyung had shared everything with Sujin, but kept her in the dark. They both apologized, and the misunderstanding dissolved as they hugged each other tightly. After school, they stopped by a food stand for big chicken thighs, laughing and chatting. Just then, they noticed the girl who had bullied them earlier. Unable to hold back her frustration, Jukyung took a sausage and threw it right at her, determined to stand up for herself and her friends, once and for all. The beauty girl, feeling threatened, starts a fight. Although Jokun's group has no real fighting experience, their frustration fuels their strength. At first, it seems like Yukun, Sua, and Ha Min might actually win, but the situation quickly evens out as they all begin tugging at each other's hair in a messy scuffle. Just then, one of the beauty girl's friends arrives to help her, and it looks like Yukun's group is in real trouble. Just as the beauty girl's friend is about to strike H-Jin, Sujun's best friend, a towering guy, over 6 feet tall and nearly 100 kilograms, steps in. His imposing presence immediately intimidates the beauty girl and her friends, and they're too scared to continue. Calmly, he tells Yukun and the others to leave, reassuring them that he'll handle the rest. After this intense moment, Yukun, Sua, and Ha-Min realize they've become closer through this experience, forming a strong bond. They feel like true friends now, sharing laughs and secrets together. Later that night, exhausted from everything that happened, Jukun lies in bed and tries to call Suho, her boyfriend. But, worn out, she accidentally falls asleep before dialing. Suho, meanwhile, waits by the phone, watching the clock tick from midnight to 3 a.m., wondering why she hasn't called, thinking something might be wrong with her phone. Suho decides to call their friend Tahun. The unexpected late-night call irritates Tahun, who answers just to hang up in annoyance. The next morning, Jukun wakes up in a panic and quickly calls Suho, but he's still too groggy from staying up all night to hear his phone ring. With a sigh, Yukun goes to visit her mother's eyebrow tattoo shop. When she gets there, her mother surprises her with big news. She's secretly enrolled Yukun in a makeup class. Thrilled, Yukun hugs her mother tightly, overjoyed by the thought of learning something she's always wanted to do. At school, Suho catches up with Yukun and asks her why she didn't answer his calls. Feeling a bit overwhelmed, Yukun asks if she could have some space, explaining that she wants a little more freedom in their relationship. Suho, surprised, hugs her from behind, asking if she's thinking of breaking up. At that moment, Sojun zooms up on his motorbike, and Yukun eagerly hops on, leaving Suho behind, who sinks to his knees filled with pain and confusion, only to suddenly wake up, realizing it was all just a dream. That night, Sojun visits Suho at the Taekwondo gym, where they decide to settle a friendly competition. In their first round, Suho throws Sojun over his shoulder with ease, but in the next round, Sojun pins Suho to the ground, only for Suho to counter with a neck lock, forcing Sojun to admit defeat. With Sojun's loss, he agrees to Suho's condition, singing on the street. As Sojun belts out a tune, a small crowd gathers, filming his unexpected performance, while Suho watches with an amused smile. Afterward, the two friends go for pizza, where Suho asked what So-jun would have wanted had he won. With a serious look, So-jun admits he'd have asked for Yukun to reject him so he could move on. Suho goes quiet. The next day, Suho and Yukun go shopping together. When Yukun's phone rings, she sees it's So-jun calling. Understanding what's about to happen, Suho encourages her to meet him. Soon, So-jun and Yukun sit together, where So-jun shyly confesses that he likes a girl who's already in a relationship. Not realizing the hint, Yukun tells him to try and win her over, which makes So-jun laugh. Slowly, Yukun realizes So-jun is talking about her, but she gently reminds him that she's already with Suho. Although So-jun is disappointed, he treasures her honesty, his admiration for her growing even stronger. The following day, Yukun gets a lovely new hairstyle and spends a perfect day with Suho. They visit the zoo, have fun at a cafe, draw portraits of each other, and end up at the beach, happy and carefree, unaware of the heartache that lies ahead. Meanwhile, So-jun goes to Suho's home, urgently knocking on the door. When there's no answer, he realizes something must be wrong. That evening, news reaches Suho that his father has suffered a brain hemorrhage in the United States and is undergoing emergency surgery. Devastated, Suho knows he must go to the US to be with his father. Although parting is painful, he and Yukun share a heartfelt goodbye. She watches as he walks away, trying to hold back her tears until he's out of sight, then breaks down, heartbroken. On the plane, Suho too finds himself overwhelmed with emotion, silently wiping away his own tears. 2 years fly by. At a class reunion, Yukun, Sua, and Ha-men drink and laugh, reminiscing about their memories. Later, So-jun, who hasn't seen Suho since he left, arrives to pick up Yukun. It turns out that Suho never returned. When he first went to the US, it looked like his father would be discharged soon, and Suho had even packed his bags. But just as he was about to leave, his father's condition took a turn for the worse, forcing Suho to stay and take care of him. Life moved on, but their hearts never truly let go. Suho called Juk-kung, hoping that by talking to her, they could finally end things between them. He couldn't stand the thought of her waiting endlessly, holding on to a hope that might never be. Juk-kung, heartbroken, refused his request and after a tearful response, hung up the phone. Later, So-jun and Jum walked out of the hotel together. So-jun offered to carry Juk-kung home, but she suddenly dashed off toward a seafood restaurant. Determined, she set her mind on catching an octopus. So-jun followed her, struggling to clean up the chaotic mess she left in her wake. Afterward, he ended up carrying her and made a quick getaway, whisking her off to a nearby square. At the square, Juk-kung playfully started suggesting potential girlfriends for So-jun, which only made him angry. In frustration, he warned her never to suggest such things again. They locked eyes, and So-jun impulsively pulled her into a hug. The next morning, Juk-kung woke up in her bed, piecing together fragments of the previous night. She called out for her younger brother, asking him to bring her water. When he walked out of her room, she realized with a start that So-jun had actually stayed at her place overnight. Her mom confirmed it, telling her that So-jun had brought her home in the middle of the night. Juk-kung, trying to act casual, pretended she didn't remember anything after leaving the hotel. After breakfast, she ushered So-jun out of the house, but just as she was about to close the door, he called her back, asking if she truly didn't remember anything from the night before. Juk-kung quickly claimed she didn't, at which point So-jun teased her, saying that they had kissed. Her whole body froze, unsure what to believe. In a mix of embarrassment and confusion, she retorted that maybe kissing wasn't the best idea, wondering aloud if he remembered everything clearly. It turned out, So-jun hadn't actually kissed her. Out of respect for his friendship with Suho, Juk-kung realized, in a sudden moment of clarity, that So-jun truly cared for her. That night, So-jun invited Juk-kung out to dinner, planning to finally confess his feelings. He didn't pressure her for an answer, but gently asked if she would go on 3 dates with him, allowing her time to consider his feelings. After she returned home, Juk-kung pulled out a gift that Suho had given her years before. Despite the time that had passed, she hadn't fully let go of him. A legend in Korea says that when the first snow falls, you might meet the person you're meant to see. As Juk-kung watched the snowfall, she looked up and saw a familiar figure walking toward her. It was Suho, her lost love, returning after 3 long years. Her eyes filled with tears as Suho approached, gently reaching out to touch her face. Though touched by his presence, Juk-kung shook off his hand, reminding him that they had broken up. Suho tried to explain how much he had missed her, but Juk-kung, trying to protect her heart, insisted she hadn't missed him. Then, with a heavy heart, she turned and ran away. Suho immediately chased after her, but she suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach in pain. Without hesitating, Suho picked her up and rushed her to the hospital. When they arrived, the doctor informed Juk-kung that she was simply constipated. Mortified, she grabbed her things and made a hasty exit. Later, when she was finally home, Suho called, but she quickly hung up on him. Hearing that Suho had returned, so Jun went to see him. Suho shared that he had just seen Juk-kung and realized she was still important to him. So, Jun, however, had already sensed Juk-kung's lingering feelings for Suho. The next morning, as Juk-kung was about to leave for work, she was surprised to see Suho waiting for her at the door, just like he used to in school. He played it off as a coincidence, but Juk-kung wasn't buying it and tried to ignore him. Suho kept following her, chatting constantly until, fed up, she called a taxi and left. When she arrived at her part-time job, she was shocked to find Suho already there, sitting and waiting. She asked how he knew where she worked, but he insisted he was simply there to get his hair done. During his visit, he asked Juk-kung to bring him tea and water, and when she stood still, her boss nudged her to serve him. After his hair was done, Suho left, but she noticed he hadn't strayed far, waiting for her outside when her shift ended. So Jun, on the other hand, was waiting to take her on the promised dates. When they left together, Suho reappeared, holding food he'd bought for her, realizing she hadn't eaten during her shift. Meanwhile, So Jun took her on a fun outing to an ice skating rink, and later they went shopping for earrings, where he playfully tricked her into paying. They shared dinner and laughed together, but later, Suho, unable to stay away, went to the comic book store, hoping to catch a glimpse of Juk-kung. Coincidentally, So Jun was walking Juk-kung home, passing by the store. As they said their goodbyes, So Jun hugged her, holding her close, just as Suho stepped out of the store and saw them. Suho's expression betrayed a mix of shock and hurt, but So Jun, noticing him, held her even tighter, leaving no doubt about his feelings. After some time, Juk-kyung finally gathered herself and gently pushed So-jun away. He looked around and noticed that Suho had already left. Just as Jang was about to explain, So-jun cut her off, mentioning they still had 2 more dates together. Then, without waiting, he turned and walked away. Later, when So-jun reached the intersection, Suho appeared, stopping him. The 2 friends decided to go out for drinks. As they sipped their wine, So-jun mentioned he was dating Jang, but Suho didn't believe him. From that point on, words were no longer needed. Their shared silence and glasses of wine conveyed everything they wanted to say. The following day, Juk-kyung went to So-jun's workplace. As he read her message, a wave of sadness swept over him. He knew the moment he'd been dreading had finally come. When he arrived at their meeting spot, he hugged her tightly, realizing that this would be the last time he held her. With a heavy heart, he decided to let her go. He informed Juk-kyung that Suho was leaving for America that night and told her it wasn't too late to go after him. Stunned, Juk-kyung hesitated for a moment before So-jun gently pushed her out the door, hiding the immense pain he felt. Alone, he walked to a secluded place, wanting to reach the rooftop for solace. But midway there, he broke down in tears. Memories of the past 3 years flooded his mind. How he was there for every significant moment in her life. He had planned her birthday, taken her to her college entrance exam, and even joined her graduation ceremony. Yet, despite all these cherished memories, he couldn't measure up to Suho. His heart ached deeply as he wept. Meanwhile, Juk-kyung was running frantically towards Suho, determined not to lose him again. Suho was packing when she arrived and began knocking on his door, calling out to him. When he didn't answer, she became so worried she burst into tears, blaming him for leaving without a word. Finally, the door opened and Juk-kyung ran inside, throwing her arms around Suho and pleading for him to stay. Seeing his packed bags, she cried even harder. Suho assured her he wasn't planning to leave, but she thought he was lying. He explained that he was only organizing his things. In that moment, Juk-kyung realized So-jun had sent her here to reunite with Suho. Embarrassed, she ran out, and Suho quickly followed, catching up and gently taking her hand. They went back to her place, where they shared a heartfelt conversation in the car, rekindling their relationship and feeling closer than ever. The next day, Juk-kyung met with So-jun to apologize, but he stopped her, explaining he had confessed his feelings for himself so he could finally move on. Although he pretended not to care, Juk-kyung understood that love is always complicated and difficult to let go of. Later that day, she faced bullying at work, but just when things were getting tense, Soo-jin suddenly appeared and stood up for her. Juk-kyung looked at her old friend, unsure of what to say. Together, they visited a bookstore, and Soo-jin revealed that she had dropped out of school because of the video scandal. She'd gone abroad with her mother after her parents' divorce. With a heavy heart, she apologized for the past. Soo-jin admitted she regretted her actions, but Juk-kyung assured her that she'd forgiven her and still considered her a friend. Their friendship was rekindled, and they made peace with each other The next day, Juk Kyung made another mistake at work and was scolded by her superior. That evening, she invited Suho to a hot pot restaurant. When Suho arrived, the women nearby couldn't help but stare, clearly taken by his good looks. Amused, Juk Kyung called him honey and asked why he had kept her waiting so long, teasing him by asking if he had already eaten. Suho was caught off guard and looked around in confusion, realizing the girls were watching them. With a playful smile, he wiped the corner of her mouth, stirring envy in those around them. As Sojun's debut day approached, he couldn't feel excited. Though a girl nearby complimented his looks, saying his female fans would adore him, he brushed it off with indifference. The other girl continued with her insincere praises, but he looked so disinterested he couldn't even respond. That night, Juk Kyung and Suho went shopping together to pick an outfit for her sister's wedding. Suddenly, Suho's phone buzzed, revealing his friend's social media post from a bar. This friend had told his girlfriend he was at a restaurant, not a bar. Suho and Juk Kyung, feeling angry and curious, decided to head to the bar to confront him. When they arrived, Suho's boyfriend explained he'd only gone to the bar for the sauna. Suho was so drunk he had no idea what was happening. Suho's boyfriend admitted Suho had been drunk since he arrived, so Juk Kyung decided to take him home herself. Once they got back, she tucked him into bed. In his drunken state, Suho asked who she was and why she was there. Juk Kyung introduced herself, and he laughed, mentioning that his girlfriend also shared her name and that she was beautiful. Juk Kyung beamed with a playful smile as she teased Suho. She couldn't help but joke, asking him if, now that he had broken up with his girlfriend, he would want to date her. Suho, slightly annoyed, replied that he was already hers. Juk Kyung, delighted by his words, smiled warmly. She stood up, preparing to go home, but Suho reached out, pulling her back into his embrace. With no other choice, Juk Kyung rested comfortably in Suho's arms, and soon, both of them drifted off to sleep. Hours later, in the middle of the night, Juk Kyung suddenly woke up. As she glanced over and saw Suho lying next to her, a rush of panic overcame her, causing her to tumble off the bed in surprise. Looking at the clock, she realized it was already 3 a.m. She quickly tried to leave, but Suho gently stopped her, asking her to stay a little longer. The two shared a night full of warmth and happiness. The next morning, Suho woke up early to prepare breakfast. Juk Kyung laughed, admitting she didn't know her way around a kitchen, playfully hinting that he might be cooking for her forever. Suho smiled, clearly amused by the idea, and they shared a happy morning together. A week later, Juk Kyung's sister's wedding day arrived. To everyone's surprise, the groom was none other than Juk Kyung's former homeroom teacher. Juk Kyung searched the lobby for Suho, who had dressed up for the occasion with a mature new hairstyle. Many of their old classmates also came to the wedding, including Sujin, who, though they hadn't seen each other in years, had since been forgiven by Suho. The group reminisced about the past, sharing laughs and memories. As the ceremony unfolded, Juk Kyung's older sister tried to put on her wedding ring, but struggled to get it off her finger. Her father attempted to help, but in the process, they accidentally dropped the ring under the table. Bending down to retrieve it, Juk Kyung's sister found herself in an awkward predicament. Her arms were too short, and she accidentally got her head stuck under the table. No matter what her parents did, they couldn't free her head, and the wedding ceremony was about to begin. At last, Juk Kyung's sister managed to enter the ceremony room with the groom, but to everyone's amusement, she walked in sporting a large necklace around her neck, still caught in the table incident. Nonetheless, the crowd burst into applause, cheering for the couple, celebrating their joyful union. The principal served as the witness, giving a short speech before Juk Kyung's sister, filled with happiness, declared that Hanin Woo was hers. More applause erupted, and then the students joined the stage for a performance. Juk Kyung's sister, feeling jubilant, also joined in, but in her excitement, she slipped and fell. Not letting it dampen her spirits, she quickly stood up, laughing, and continued dancing, creating an energetic and lively atmosphere. Even the principal joined in the fun, making the wedding a truly vibrant celebration filled with laughter and joy, a perfect ending to a beautiful day. A month later, the big day arrived for Sojun's debut performance. Although there were several makeup artists available, Sojun specifically asked Juk Kyung to do his makeup, trusting her entirely. Gazing at her, he wished time could stand still in that precious moment, holding on to the feelings he had for her. Juk Kyung and Suho attended his debut together, both eager to see him perform. Under a purple sky with a cold wind adding to the atmosphere, Sojun sang a heartfelt song written by Suho. Watching Sojun up on stage brought back a flood of memories for Suho, and he couldn't hold back his tears, reflecting on all the moments the three of them had shared together. In that instant, their bond of friendship felt stronger than ever. As the performance came to an end, Suho and Juk Kyung were content, their journey together complete. And with that, the story ended on a note of friendship, love, and happiness. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.